Welcome everyone to Nerd of the Rings. Today we are talking some gaming with Mr. Rob Alderman, who is the Middle-earth brand manager at Games Workshop. And you'll no doubt know of Games Workshop from Warhammer. And today our topic of discussion is the Middle-earth strategy battle game. Rob, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Matt. It's great to be here. I'm a big fan of Nerd of the Rings. It's wonderful to be here.
Oh, thanks. Well, I always like asking people first, right off the bat. I want to ask, how were you first introduced to Tolkien?
First introduced to Tolkien. So it's an interesting one, actually. So I actually discovered it through the movies, like so many people did. But I've been a Warhammer hobbyist since 1998. And it was only really when Games Workshop announced that they were making a licensed miniatures game based on the movies that Peter Jackson was about to release, that I kind of got into that lore and IP, just because being a Warhammer fan and this new thing that was coming out in the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game was so exciting. I kept a really close eye on what was happening. Went to go and see the movies and just absolutely fell in love with it through the movies and the miniatures game that Games Workshop made. And it made me want to explore the lore. So I took a deep dive into all of the various additional content that Tolkien's done and all the kind of encyclopedias that have been published about all the little nitty gritty bits of detail there are in Middle Earth and the wider Arda, of course. Yeah. So really since the movies, and that's been an established love ever since, you know.
So how did your journey, what was your journey from that point of just being a massive fan of both Warhammer and Lord of the Rings to now where you are managing the Middle-earth brand for Games Workshop?
Yeah, so I've worked in Games Workshop retail quite a few years ago, in one of the Warhammer stores that we've got around the world. So I worked in one in the UK, which kind of introduced me to kind of the Games Workshop way of working and the ethos that we have here. And then I left and I kind of worked around the wider miniature war games industry for a few different companies, and we did. With one of my previous employers, we did some other licensed products based on movies. I won't go into the detail of what, it's probably not appropriate. But Games Workshop put this job up, and I just was like, that's the IP I want to work on. I'm absolutely obsessed with Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings and everything to do with it, and especially from the perspective of the miniatures game. I'm a massive miniature gamer. So I went for it, and I was very lucky to be offered the job after the interview. I think based on some of the experience I had beforehand working with licenses. And it's an absolute privilege to work with Middle-earth Enterprises, the folks there, and Warner Brothers as well. And even Weta Workshop. Like, I know you had Dan Faulkner on relatively recently, and we worked relatively closely with Dan as well, getting kind of exclusive background photos and things that you might not see in some of the published material they do, just to try and get the most accurate representations in our miniatures. But it's really cool, and that's kind of how I got into the job. I've been doing it for 4 years now. It's not just Middle-earth I look after. There's a couple of other properties I look after. But Middle-earth is the thing that really got me into the business. It's the thing I'm really passionate about as well.
Very cool. So for those who are newbies, like admittedly myself, how would you describe strategy battle games, to this thing that you guys do so incredibly well to someone who's a total newbie to this type of game?
Yeah, so we call it the Warhammer hobby, right? So the Warhammer hobby is building and painting miniature figurines. You assemble those into a collection, which you would then put onto a tabletop that's modeled to look like an environment. And you play through a battle game using those miniatures. So you and your opponent, who might be a friend of yours, will have their own collection of miniatures as well. You use those to play through either a scenario you've made up, like a pitched battle between two factions that may not have met in Tolkien's work, or you might recreate scenes like Balin's Tomb or Amon Hen, or any of those major important battle scenes that we all know and love from Tolkien's lore. that's essentially what the Middle-earth strategy battle game is all about. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what advice would you give, someone who's new to it and, has maybe seen videos, or they know that Henry Cavill is really big on Warhammer and that's the extent of their knowledge. What what advice would you give to someone who's looking to start out in this type of game?
Yeah, so I think look out, see if there's a Warhammer store nearby you, or a gaming store that stocks our products. Feel free, go inside, have a chat with those guys, talk to them about what it is to do the hobby. They can be a wealth of information, and if you don't have that nearby, then we've got official channels that you can look at, like Warhammer TV, that have got how to paint guides, how to play games, that sort of thing. They're really useful. And generally speaking, like anything nowadays, if you go onto YouTube and just look for some material, you'll find all sorts of introductory material that's well worth looking at. And obviously, we design some products that are better for newbies to get started. Battle of Osgiliath, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, is coming out soon. That's one that's definitely directed at people that want to start the strategy battle game.
Yeah, I've heard that, the painting of the figurines. I get a lot of comments that people will, listen to podcasts or my videos while they're painting figurines, and it's a very soothing experience for a lot of people. Very kind of a nice de-stressor in their life.
Yeah, totally. I think, I mean, even for me, that's definitely the case. I'm more of a painter and a model maker than I am a gamer, if anything. And I find it a hugely de-stressing experience. I mean, I've been doing it for years. It takes a lot of time to learn how to do it. Some people are better at it than others. And I don't think that matters. You just do what you do. But yeah, it's a wonderful thing to engage with these things in that way. And I think one of the novelties of the Middle-earth strategy battle game is the research that you can do. So if you're really into the books and the wider material, being able to really dive into that and look for details about color schemes or any of that stuff, or who fought with who at which battles when, and building your collection around those stories is a very cool and exciting thing, especially as a Tolkien fan. And then applying that through our miniatures range is just really cool, I think.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned it already, but let's talk about Battle for Osgiliath. What is, first of all, tell me when does it come out?
Oh, so I think it's December.
That's what I've heard is December.
Year? I think it's first lands.
I've heard December. I've heard December.
You know what?
I didn't know
we
if we had
work so far in advance.
Okay, so I didn't know if there was a precise
we work so
date,
far in advance. I sometimes
December.
miss them.
Okay. And I'm curious. So give people kind of a rundown. What is in the Battle for Osgiliath set? I actually have it right here, so we can show what it looks like. There it is, the Battle for Osgiliath. And you mentioned this is a great kind of on ramp for folks who are kind of new to the game, as well as and a good extension for those who are already into it.
Oh yeah, for sure. So it's a big box game. It's got everything you need to start playing the game with. You would just need to buy some glue and paints to assemble everything that's in there. But you've got the main rule book that's got all the rules for the Middle-earth strategy battle game there. It's got a supplement in there that's got stuff to get you started, to tell you like the core scenarios to learn how to play the game with. And then it's got 2 armies in there. One of them is a Mordor army led by Gothmog, which is an awesome model. And then it's got a Gondor army as well, led by Faramir, Madril, and Damrod, which are 3 of the rangers that feature in The Return of the King.
Yeah. Awesome. Now I'm curious, what, as you guys are developing this game, what kind of challenges are unique to adapting the world of Tolkien for this type of game?
Sure. So it's mainly about tone. So it's kind of it's sometimes described as low fantasy because there's an element of realism to it, right? Nothing is crazy over the top fantastical spells and wizardry and that sort of thing. it's kind of low level magic, and all of the characters are kind of believable, and there's a few epic moments that we really try and recreate. And I guess that is one of the challenges, is we've got everything from Bill the Pony and Rosie Cotton all the way up to the Balrog and Sauron himself as models in the game with rules and that can interact with one another, you know. So that's a big challenge, you know. It's making a game system that actually allows all of those things to kind of compete with one another. And then also just the fact that this is a game that's been in development constantly for 21 years now. So we're always kind of just adding new things to, well, not new things, but we're adding and revisiting things. New things do come out every so often. We might expand factions that are kind of ancillary in the lore. So we might decide, you know what, we've got some wild men of Dunland. Let's make that into a full Dunlending faction and start adding things like Dunlending horsemen, some new characters as well. And exploring the whole Tolkien universe from the perspective of the battles that happen, because that's what we're focused on. Gives us a slightly different lens, because although battles feature heavily in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, it's not the only thing that features. And sometimes there's an appetite from people to say, well, what about this iconic character like Rosie Cotton?
Yeah.
We don't see her fight any battles or anything like that, but actually it makes sense. The Scouring of the Shire happens. So what characters are going to be there for the Scouring of the Shire that aren't necessarily obvious to be there? She's one of them. So we try and pitch these characters in that way, and that can sometimes be a bit of a challenge, and also making them feel recognizable. So we do that with things like special rules that might be unique to some of those characters, that make them feel more like the character we know from the screen or from the text. It's just an interesting challenge. It's quite cool though.
Absolutely. Now, I'm curious. You got me intrigued by the special rule. So, can you give us some examples of some special rules that you've come up for characters to make them, you know, kind of embody that character that we know?
Sure. So, on the spot there, but Gothmog is a character I love using. So I normally play evil armies because when I was growing up, all my friends wanted to be the good guys. They wanted to be Aragorn and Boromir and Gandalf and Galadriel. So to get my friends to play the game, I was always the evil player. I took the bad guy so they could play the good guy they wanted to play. And having done that growing up, it's meant that I love using Gothmog. And one of Gothmog's rules is the time of men is over, the time of the orc has come. So we're literally using like a quote from the film.
Yeah.
And adding some rules. So he can call that once per game, and it makes him hit men harder, essentially. It makes it easier for him to kill men and all of the orcs around him within 18 inches on the tabletop. So that's the sort of thing that we do. We try and be playful, find a cool quote from the movie or an action that they do. We've done things like we've given rules for every single one of the gifts of Galadriel. So if you want to play the Fellowship once they've left Lothlorien, they can have special rules associated to the gifts that they were given in the books, which is quite cool.
Yeah. And for those book fans out there, I did see recently you guys, you know, you had revealed some new characters that you were releasing, and I saw an Elrond, but book fans will be really excited that you guys have a Glorfindel, I believe.
That's right. Yeah. So we're really lucky to have a license with Middle-earth Enterprises as well as Warner Brothers. So the Warner Brothers license lets us look at anything that they featured in the movies. The Middle-earth Enterprises license lets us look at anything from the text of The Lord of the Rings, including the appendices and The Hobbit. And then we can take anything that's written about and make it look like it came from the movies as well, because we've got that joint license. So Glorfindel is a great example where we took a character that everyone really loves from the books and the description down to the bells that ring on his horse. And then we added like a layer of what would it look like what do we think it would look like if it was in the movies? So we look at all the costumes that the amazing guys at Weta Workshop did for Rivendell, and just apply that as a kind of pastiche to the bits and pieces that Tolkien described. And we try and do justice to that wherever we can. It's a really, really interesting exercise. We've done that a few times though. So things like Mordor is a great example where we've done lots of new character orcs in particular. Because the other thing that we're allowed to do is to help tell the stories. We can create new characters that are befitting to the IP but don't change the world.
Yeah.
So we've done characters that's like an orc that was the first orc to jump over the wall at Minas Tirith, or he led the first assault over the wall at Minas Tirith. And he's just a big burly orc. And we used all the design language from the movies, but it was the Middle-earth Enterprises license that allowed us to create a new character. He's not super unique. He doesn't change the world. He doesn't kill Aragorn or anything like that. But it's just an opportunity to help us tell a story. So
yeah. Now, so one of the factions that you've done this for, that have always interested me, the lands of Rhûn and Harad are two lands that have always interested me because there's so little written about them. And I know, specifically for Harad, I don't know if you guys have done Rhûn as well, but for Harad, you guys have created some characters and some lands and some kind of backstory elements to fill out that story as part of the game.
That's right. Yeah, it's because ultimately tabletop wargaming is a great way to tell stories. And I can't remember the exact quote from Tolkien, but there was something along the lines of he wanted people to tell their own stories within his world. We really adopted that, especially where it's such an open universe. We're not trying to change the timeline, we're not trying to put any core new things in or anything like that, but it's just an exciting opportunity to look at a swathe of land with very little detail. Like you look at the Shire and all the different names of places in the Shire and the amount of detail. And then you look at this huge bit of land with Harad and Far Harad, that's pretty barren. So we populated that a little bit with some new cities. We created some new heroes that herald from those cities and what kind of troops they had. We did some of that expansion quite a long time ago. So around 2004, I think, was when we started really looking at Harad in that sort of way. And we featured, we just talked about what kind of troops would the Haradrim send to Pelennor Fields. And that was, we decided, let's do the fiefdoms of Gondor. How would they feature? What would they look like? And the Swan Knights of Dol Amroth. And then what would Harad bring as well to fight against those guys? And like I said, it's all through the lens of the battle game and helping tell the story, without taking away from the core things that people know from the movies and the books.
So I'm curious, what's the process like when you guys, go to fill out that story? You have to not only take into account, I would imagine, what Tolkien has said about those areas, but then also making it functional for the game. So how does that process play out?
Yeah, so the most important thing is that we go through all the lore that we can, that we've got access to and that we're allowed to use. We kind of start putting together a timeline of events, certainly events that are kind of relevant as well, or that have some relevance around it. So even if there's like a political event, there might be a battle that's not been talked about or something that we might add to. And then we start to look for, where are the gaps here? What would lead to that event or that big event? For example, like what would happen on the way from Harad to Pelennor? Are there any events that would happen up to that? Or we know that there were raids on the fiefdoms. The Corsairs raided the fiefdoms. That's all we know. Whereas we're like, okay, how do we explore the fact that that happened, and what detail can we add to that to make it interesting and a compelling story for people? So we look at that, and then we look at opportunities for what miniatures do we need to help make those stories. What miniatures do we need to make to help tell those stories? We build together a plan, and we just start working on it. And it's just a very exciting bubble of kind of creativity that happens in the design studio when our whole team is just working on one supplement. So, for example, one that came out recently was Defense of the North, which is like a two-pronged book, really. It talks about the Easterlings attacking Erebor in the late Third Age, and the forces of Mordor attacking Lothlorien and Mirkwood. And that, again, it's just something that's kind of talked about a little bit in the appendices. And we decided, right, let's expand this. Let's create some narrative characters that help kind of make it interesting for people. So we know King Dane, we know Thorin Stonehelm, his son, we know Bard II and Brand of Dale.
Yeah.
but we don't know anything about the bad guys. So we're like, right, who's leading this assault? We know Kamal the Easterling is down at the Black Gate. We can't have him up here. So we had the Dragon Emperor of Rhûn, and we really expanded the Easterling army, actually. Again, all using the imagery from the movies, just trying to push it in slightly different ways. You know, let's do some slightly lighter armored guys. Let's do some heavier armored guys. Let's do a cool character for them as well. Just tell those stories. But that was a really exciting time for us. And then when we released it, the wonderful thing is seeing people engage with it and start to build and paint these models, take them to the tournaments that are run around the world, you know, using them, really engaging with it and playing through the scenarios that we've written to try and help tell that story.
Yeah, I can see, you know, the kind of creative freedom and, you know, the fun to be had, not only in, like you said, replicating battles like the Battle of Pelennor Fields or something that we know more about, but the War in the North is a great example where we just get a couple footnotes that say they attacked Lorien and were repelled 3 times, and we have this huge siege of Erebor that's, you know, pretty significant for the people living there. We don't hear much about it, but it definitely allows, you know, I'm sure you guys, but then also the players to have some creative freedom and really have fun and explore it.
Yeah, it's cool, and I think we're not alone in doing it. So obviously, there's games like Battle for Middle Earth, the PC game. They did a lot of that sort of stuff as well. The War in the North video game that dealt with the war in the North on the other side of the mountains. There was that. You know, it's just a great opportunity.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, you know, we just had Battle for Osgiliath come out. Are there any, you know, as a Tolkien fan yourself, are there any that you have on your wish list that you hope to get to someday?
Oh man. Yeah. So dude, I'd love to do Khazad Dûm. Okay.
Yeah.
So I love that kind of the tragedy stories of Khazad Dûm. I think you'd have to cover multiple eras, obviously, because it's just it's not just one tragedy story. It's a number in a row, you know.
Yeah.
I just think that would be awesome, and the opportunity, like Tolkien actually name dropped a lot of dwarves, just randomly, very little information on them, you know. But he name dropped so many dwarves that we think would just make great miniatures. And then exploring Moria as a faction as well. We've done a lot of that in the past. They're quite an established army in the game. With the Balrog and the Moria Goblins and various types of Moria Goblin troops that we've added along the way, Goblin Kings and stuff. It would be wonderful to explore that a little further. And I know a lot of people would be on board with that as well. The other one's The Last Alliance. I think obviously the Rings of Power, they've shown us lots of cool stuff that you could do with the Second Age. We can do things slightly differently. We can do our own take on it. That would be really cool. We could explore some of the same characters in a different way. That might be quite fun. The Last Alliance is the one I hear people saying all the time that they want to see, you know, but that's one to build up to, I think. I think that's a big, tumultuous event that could be really, really exciting if we give it the right amount of attention. That could be really cool.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know,
and now people are going to think I'm revealing something and I'm not.
that would obviously be, you know, it's such a huge moment that we only get kind of a glimpse of. You know, it's an extended glimpse, and it's, you know, my favorite opening to a movie of all time, the prologue sequence of Fellowship of the Ring. But it's still like, you can tell it's such a massive event and such an important battle. But even in that phenomenal prologue sequence, we only get a taste of it. So yeah, I could definitely see that. It doesn't hurt that, you know, the armor that everyone is rocking in that prologue is pretty iconic and awesome as well.
It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And I just think of things like things that weren't in the movie as well, like Anarion. Obviously, that would be really cool to explore, is us, if we got an opportunity to design Anarion in a similar sort of costume to Isildur. I think things like the dwarves that fought at the Last Alliance. That's a thing. There's no leader named for them, so we could explore that too.
And it's implied on both sides.
Things
even.
like
they're implied that some fought with Sauron.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, for sure. There's just some really cool things like and the build up to the Last Alliance, that final battle. There's so much we could do with that material. It's just be really cool to do. It's be a really exciting project, but it's just a huge one. Like we'd have to really sit down and think about how we're gonna tackle that. But it'd just be really exciting to go through. And I won't lie, like people must know these are the things we sit down in the design studio and we talk about all day. Like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we did this? Or someone will be reading a bit of text and we'll find some throwaway line and say, like, wouldn't this be a wonderful thing to explore and look at in more detail?
Now you've got my wheels turning here, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you could make some Entwife's figurines just to be driven off by the fires of Sauron. It could be kind of a tragic thing.
You could do the burning of the Brown Lands. Like, no kidding, man. It could just be amazing. And I mean, in the build up to Rings of Power as well, that's the thing we all talked about, was like, what could this be? What stories are they going to tell? And I think, I mean, I get a great opportunity to talk to a lot of our fans because I go to a lot of the events that we run for the game. And it's wonderful just talking to people and hearing what they're excited about. And I think that's also a novelty of the Middle-earth strategy battle game compared to some of the other Warhammer games, which is that there's kind of there's a window and we know what the frame is and we know what we're working with and the stories that have been told. And there's always little pockets and corners of things that we haven't quite managed to explore yet. And hearing what people's priorities are and which things they're interested in seeing as miniatures is quite exciting. And the number of people who actually they've gotten into the wider Tolkien lore because of the game, really. So they've watched the movies, thought that was really cool, decided, oh, I'd like to try this strategy battle game thing, get into the miniatures, and then start getting really attached to characters that are from the books, like Glorfindel. And that's the thing that makes them want to keep reading and finding out. And everyone's got their route, right? And it's really nice to hear when the game we're working on is their route to it. That's just a really, really exciting thing and a privilege. It's an absolute privilege.
Now, do you have a favorite? You mentioned you play as the bad guys a lot. Do you have a favorite faction or character out of all the incredible figures that you guys have made and the characters and everything? Do you have a favorite?
That's a difficult one. So I think in terms of faction, Mordor's the one I go for. So Mordor's a cool faction in the game because it's got so many different facets to it. You can play it in so many different ways. Because obviously you can go with ring wraiths and do something a bit more magical with those, or you can do a very hard-hitting army led by Gothmog. I tend to favor that. I won't lie, the new plastic Gothmog figure that we've got in the Battle of Osgiliath box and will be sold separately as well, like that is just an amazing figure. It's absolutely stunning. And like we got some really good access to some reference images for that one that allowed us to make a really what's the word I'm looking for? A really detailed model that's a really good replica of what you see on screen. It was just a really exciting opportunity, and I love that character. I love that figure. And the funny thing about it is, obviously, Gothmog is just a name in the book, right? There's no description for Gothmog, so the screen depiction though is so memorable. I'm hoping people really engage with that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't help but think how awesome that relationship is that you guys have. It's such a unique thing that you guys, have that dual license, like you said, but then kind of the icing on the cake is that relationship with Weta, the incredible work they did. And so that you can not only replicate the characters they depicted, but like you said before with Glorfindel and others, to kind of do a what if Weta did do this character. That's pretty special, I think.
Yeah. It's quite funny actually, because sometimes what happens is they'll we'll be working on something and they'll release a statue and we're like, damn, that looks a bit like our one, and we have to fiddle with things. Or they release a figure and we're like, oh, that's the pose we wanted to do, and we're never quite sure, like, can we do the same pose? Is that okay? We just do a miniature version of it, which is quite fun. I've joked with Dan about that before. It's good, but the great story I've got with it though actually is Snaga. You know Snaga?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
In the Two Towers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Played by Jed Brophy.
So it's a proud thing for me. So it's the only, yeah, Jed Brophy, yeah, for sure. It's the only miniature that we've done from the movie that you can only see from the shoulders up. And what we did is we spoke to Dan and said, look, have you got any photos from the set of Jed wearing the costume? And he was like, yeah, just give me a week. And he went away into their warehouse and he dug through their photos, like hard copy photos. And he found 2 photos of Jed Brophy standing in T-pose, like with the full costume head to toe. And we just copied that, and it was bizarre. It was just really cool. And that opportunity is the perfect example of why it's so wonderful working with them, and how eager they are to help answer those questions. And the other really cool thing is when we see some of the sculptors that worked on the movies, when they show like, oh, hey, cool, Games Workshop have made a copy of the statue that I carved in the movie. So that's just cool, because we don't know who made what.
Yeah.
But we follow a lot of these people, obviously. It's just cool.
Well, you've definitely got my interest as a huge dwarf fan. Talking about Khazad-dûm, I'm definitely going to be keeping my eyes open for what may come there. Like you said, there's some pretty significant moments, whether it's the original fall to the Balrog, or Balin attempting to recolonize it, or it's like there's a video game coming out, the Return to Moria game, where that is, them recolonizing it after the War of the Ring. So it's got some pretty big moments to choose from.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's room to cover almost all of it,
Yeah.
We've got an extensive range of Khazad-dûm dwarves already, because it's ground we have covered in the past. It's just I think there is more ground to cover, and there's always an opportunity to come back to places and say, like, did we do this full justice at the time? Because we were limited on what we could deliver. Go back to it, explore it a bit further, add a layer of detail that people are looking for. Yeah.
So I'm curious how.
How about you?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you actually. Have you had a chance to look through the range? Are there any ranges you're interested in terms of factions? I'm just curious.
Well, as there's been so much focus on the Second Age, when I saw, armored up Elrond, I immediately gravitated toward that because he's one of my favorite characters of all time. And he's one of those characters that I was also, like you, introduced via the films, and you just kind of get the tail end of his story, and there's so much more to his story and his life that I just absolutely love that character. And he's one that I'm always, touting to people who don't know the books as well. Like, you have no idea how awesome this character is. So yeah, I kind of gravitate toward that, but anything with the dwarves I'm all about, because I know that in real life I would never play an elf. I do not have the appearance of an elf, so I kind of gravitate toward the dwarves as well.
That's cool, man. Yeah.
So I'm curious. We talked about the process for developing characters, and you mentioned that you guys have a lot of conversations where it's wouldn't it be cool if? Is that where things like the Battle for Osgiliath, is that how these sets come about? Just conversations of wouldn't it be cool if, or what's the creative process like from scratch? Like, okay, we're gonna do a new expansion or a new box set. What's that process look like?
Yeah, so obviously there's a bit of business strategy there. So
Yeah.
we'll sometimes look at things like we want to have a beat in the release schedule, or we want to have a supplement come out, or a box game, or something just to help add some more interest to the game. And it might be that on the schedule we decide there needs to be a box game here. What opportunities have we got? And we'll start looking through all the opportunities we've got and what we can realistically deliver and what we think people have the appetite for. So I think one of the bits of feedback that we had with Pelennor Fields, which is our last box game, was that there was no terrain in there. I mean, Pelennor Fields is a field, so I don't necessarily, it's an open field, so I don't think you necessarily need any terrain. But Osgiliath is defined by the terrain. So we were like, okay, people wanted terrain in a box. Let's do a game, a box game that is really tied into the terrain that you're going to get. And I forgot to mention this when you said what comes in the Osgiliath box game. One really important thing is the terrain that you get in there. So you get some Gondor ruins that you can build as big or as small as you want. You can keep adding to them as well. So we'll be selling the box separately of Gondor ruins. And you can make a full board that just looks like Osgiliath. Our guys that work in the exhibition that we've got here on site in Nottingham in the UK, they're building at the moment a massive Osgiliath display board to put in our exhibition that's looking incredible. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what all the hobbyists do with that. Yeah. Because we did one for Edoras as well. We sell a Rohan house that you can build as big or as small as you want as well. And just seeing what people do with these kits is incredible. I get really excited about terrain because for me, Middle-earth is as much about the environment as it is about the heroes and the characters. They take on character of their own, and I'd love to do more and more. But Gondor's the next one we're doing. We're hoping to do some more in the future. And we did the other one we did that was really cool was Dol Guldur, because that's such an iconic environment in The Hobbit. And the kit is incredible because everything's at a weird angle in the movies. The guy who designed it is an insanely clever engineer, and he's made it so you can build it in all these crazy angles and as big as you want. And Gondor's going to do a very similar thing. So yeah, very exciting with that one.
Very cool. So I'm curious. I've got a couple of questions as we kind of wind down here. You know, if your friends did let you play as a good guy, what would be your favorite? What would be your favorite heroic character? And I usually ask this in the lens of throughout Tolkien's works as a whole. So you could take it either way, whether it's in game or from the books. Who would you say is your favorite Middle-earth character overall?
So I really like Tolkien's tragedy stories, you know, and there's quite a few. So Boromir is probably one of my favorite kind of good guy character. I love that he had that fall from grace and then was able to redeem himself. And that moment, the death of Boromir in the movies, is just such a touching moment. It's incredible. I thought that was really incredibly filmed, you know. They went off-piste a little bit from the text in the book, but I think they actually did it justice in a way that worked really well in cinema. And I just love Sean Bean's portrayal of Boromir, because I think it was something people weren't expecting as well, especially because a lot of people have already had the image of what Boromir was in the animated movie, which is very different from what the Peter Jackson movies had. I love that depiction. And then also like the opportunity to play him as at the height of his strength and power at Osgiliath is really cool as well. So he's probably my favorite good guy character, I'd say. Other than that, let's go with Bill the Pony, right? Yes. Everyone loves the little guy.
Yeah, gosh, I can't believe I didn't follow up on that. I should get flack in the comments for not following up on that. So you said we could play as Bill the Pony. I am very curious what kind of special skills Bill the Pony has and what kind of havoc he can wreak.
Yeah, so he helps buff up the rest of the Fellowship, right? So he's not a great fighter himself, but what he's good at is giving buffs to the rest of the Fellowship themselves. I can't remember the exact rules, but I think because we've got rules for Barlam and Butterbur as well, mad as it is. But I think there's I think there's an opportunity to give buffs to Barlaman as well.
Man, well, yeah. Now I really want to play as Barlaman.
Yeah, yeah. It's the whole idea that you've got on building up to the scouring of the Shire. Obviously, Sharky and his rogues attack Bree, so we have got a scenario that's all about defending Bree. And Harry Goatleaf, the gatekeeper in the book, he's not crushed by horses in the book. He actually sides with the ruffians. So our model for Harry Goatleaf, he's got his lantern like he is in the movie. You can use him either as part of a Bree army, or you can use him as part of Sharky's rogues, which is quite interesting. But this is what I mean by doing looking at sideline characters from the movies and books and saying, is there any way this is applicable to the battle game? And if there is, we sometimes have a little bit of fun with it.
Yeah, man, I love. Yeah, Barliman is one of those characters that, especially I really love in the 1981 radio drama, and it it was the delivery of it is fantastic and everything. Like Aragorn has one of my favorite insults where he says that he only remembers his name because people shouted at him all day. And so the idea of playing as Barliman in the Battle of Bree, I don't know, that just really appeals to me.
Yeah, there's just, like I say, there's so much room to explore, and we love looking at every little nook and cranny for stuff. And it's I almost feel like the challenge from our fans is to find the weirdest and most wonderful little bit of a scene that we can play out. It's cool. It's cool.
Now, another question I have for you, and this could be a place that you guys have adapted or just in general throughout all of Tolkien's works. Where in Middle Earth would you most like to live?
That's an interesting one. I mean, there's a comfort to being in Rivendell, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think. There's a comfort to being in Rivendell. But then the Shire, man, that's just home comforts. The Shire is pure home comforts. It would have to be there, I think. Although I've never been able to get over to New Zealand to go to Hobbiton. I'd love to do that one day. So I think probably the Shire. Let's go with that.
That's a good answer. Great. Once again,
I bet that's like the basic answer that everyone gives, right?
No, I mean, we get a variety of them. Rivendell and the Shire are very, very popular answers. Occasionally someone will say Khazad-dûm or Numenor, which is always interesting. I'm like, you seem like you're banking on being able to choose the time period, I would imagine there.
That's true. If you get to choose the time period, I mean, Second Age Khazad-dûm
cool.
Looks amazing, right? Now that we've seen that, looks amazing.
Well, once again, I know we're getting short on time here, so I wanted to remind folks once again, the new set is called the Battle for Osgiliath, and whether you are a seasoned player or a newbie, it's a good introductory set or a good expansion set. That's what it looks like right there. We got I'm pointing the wrong direction. There we go. Gothamog and Faramir are the two big ones here, but it's got lots of great landscape. We've got a troll there as well. We didn't mention the troll before, but and Gothmog is on a warg, for those who are curious what the statue's like there. So Rob, where can people find the new game in December when it comes out?
Yeah, so that'll be, as you say, available in December. You'll be able to get that from your local Warhammer store or your local gaming store, as long as they're Games Workshop stockists. And obviously online on the Games Workshop web store or any other retailer of our products.
Fantastic. Well, Rob, thanks so much for joining us today and sharing, your love of Middle Earth and the unique way that you get to play in this world.
Thanks very much, Matt. It's been wonderful to talk to you today, actually. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, guys, Battle for Osgiliath comes out December. So very, very shortly here. You guys can get your hands on it. And thanks again, Rob. And we will see you guys next time on Nerd of the Rings.